since Bram Stoker created vampires as creatures that cause terror in humans. The aversion to garlic, the fear of the cross, death by stake and destruction by sunlight are elements that permeate the imagination of those who read about these creatures of the night. Becoming a vampire is becoming a creature that achieves the ideal of human immortality at the expense of humanity. It defines what it is like to lose what you are. Congratulations, entering through death and the shedding of your own blood terrifies the human being, just as death brings fear, because the step after the last breath is frightening. In this way, the fear of losing identity and the fear of becoming what is unknown, strange, and so distinct makes human beings not only defend themselves, but also destroy vampires. They cause fear between the preservation of what it means to be human, fear and the feeling of detachment in the face of the unknown. Vampires are frightening and thus generate destructive violence on the part of those who fight for what remains of who they are. Richard Matheson wrote the book I Am Legend. Have you seen the 2007 film with Will Smith? The film, however, has such profound differences that they change the understanding of the work's message. The story of the book follows the life of Robert Neville, the man who lost his wife and daughter and has to survive in isolation to avoid being devoured by vampires. Having developed some kind of immunity, he is not contaminated by what makes humans vampires in that story. One of the scary things is that vampires are not creatures that appear supernaturally. He begins to research what could have caused this and comes to the conclusion that it is a type of bacteria that allows this type of survival. On the other hand, it is a tight demand on the humanity of those who parasitize. The book also shows the effects of the extreme isolation that Neville goes through. Initially, he still struggles with sexual urges. The vampires seduce him with their behavior at night. He resists this, but his sexual appetite is lost as Neville lives in isolation. He loses desire, that starts to have less meaning in your life. Robert Neville has several fits, like Dostoevsky's Underground Man. He starts to despise himself. The loss of contact with human beings makes him lose what was so important as human. The feeling of belonging suffers deeply. After the dog he had found dies after a few days, the one that would be the only company he would have after so long also dies with him, and Neville's hopes increasingly die, and he is destroyed. Until then, Neville finds Ruth, another survivor. The encounter is so strange that it is as if she had met an alien. After managing to establish some closeness, Neville has some empathy for another human being. He is attracted to and is part of a community of people who, having been contaminated, did not turn into vampires and who managed to formulate a kind of medicine that suppresses what would make them become human beings once and for all. However, Neville hunts people, even those who have not transformed. He becomes a threat, and ironically, being human, he is a threat to the new humanity that was being formed. Neville becomes a vampire, the freak, the monster who hunts those who are part of a community. He begins to threaten the lives of those who struggle to survive. Neville understands that just as he was killing the vampires because they were a threat to humanity, the humanity he represented, by becoming the last representative of humanity, he becomes the one who is a threat to the society that was forming. He places himself as the target of that society that wanted to kill him to ensure its own survival. He understands that it is through expiatory violence that the new humanity maintains itself. He is a legend not because he represents the survival of humanity in the face of a threat, but because he is the one who threatened the survival of the new humanity that was being formed. Neville places himself as a target of that society that wanted to kill him to ensure its own survival. He understands that it is through expiatory violence that the new humanity maintains itself. He is a legend not because he represents the survival of humanity in the face of a threat, but because he is the one who threatened the survival of the new humanity that was being formed. Neville becomes the target of that society that wanted to kill him to ensure its own survival. He understands this. He is a legend not because he represents the survival of humanity in the face of a threat, but because he is the one who threatened the survival of the new humanity that was being formed. He becomes the abnormal, the monster that hunts those who are part of a community. Humanity has become the threat to humanity. He who represents destruction, who is within the blood and who kills those who differ from him. Humanity has become, in addition to vampires, the ultimate monster. This last representative. That's the horror that matters. In the first place, we see a horror of mirrors. Look at this city of its equals so that humanity preserves its identity. The second realizes his identity when he is among those who are like him. He realizes his qualities, his defects, his morality, and how far he is willing to go. In dialogue with Ruth, Neville asks if she saw the expression on the faces of those she was associated with when he killed them. The book says this, but did you see their faces when they killed? Her throat moved convulsively. It was joy, Baba, your pure joy. And Ruth responds, did you ever see your face when you killed? It writhed. It was ravenous, and you weren't even trying to kill me. You just ran after me. As the story unfolds, we see Robert Neville go through a profound transformation. Initially, he is portrayed as an ordinary human being, fighting for survival in a world dominated by vampires. However, as the narrative progresses and he faces increasingly extreme challenges, Neville finds himself forced to delve into his own inner darkness. The gradual loss of his humanity is symbolized not only by his actions, but also by his inner reflections. When he questions the difference between his own fight for survival and the instincts of a virus, bacteria, or parasite, he is essentially questioning what defines the human essence. He is suggesting that in an extreme and hostile environment, the lines between what makes us human and what makes us mere agents of survival become blurred. This deep reflection makes us confront existential questions about our own humanity. Are we losing, amid the struggles for survival, what makes us truly human? Are we simply becoming creatures that seek to survive at any cost, without regard for the moral and ethical principles we traditionally associate with humanity? The metaphor of the abyss, mentioned in the passage, suggests that by moving away from our fundamental values and giving ourselves over to the pure quest for survival, we run the risk of transforming ourselves into something we no longer recognize as human. We are facing a battle not only against external threats, but also against our own inner demons, our potential for cruelty and dehumanization. By asking ourselves whether it is ourselves or the abyss that turns us into monsters, we are confronting the duality inherent in human nature, our ability to be both heroes and villains, depending on the circumstances in which we find ourselves. This reflection forces us to look inside ourselves and question to what extent we are willing to sacrifice our humanity in the name of survival. Secondly, if communion gives us identity, the question now becomes the values that this identity carries. Because in the same way that humanity sees vampires as abnormal and threatening, this new humanity sees old humanity as abnormal and threatening. Neville thinks to himself, I'm abnormal here. Normality was a majority concept, a standard of many and not a standard of just one man. The point is not simply what is considered normal, it goes beyond that, expanding the discussion and reflecting on whether a standard of normality, morality, and ethics has been left exclusively in the hands of human beings. What becomes normal is simply what is, or what passes is normal. The moral and ethical becomes as fluid as the formation of the groups that form their identity. That is why, if there is no absolute moral standard that regulates human relationships, these relationships themselves are doomed to the formation of a new humanity at the expense of the destruction of the old one. Consequently, we live in the destruction of humanity itself, and fermentation is brilliant in showing how fragile it is to be who we are when we are alone in the universe. At the end of the day, we're all a little bit Robert Neville. If you like the content and want to help us continue, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment or suggestion about a book, film, series, anime that you want to see analyzed on the channel.